Donald hadn't been in his hometown for 5 years now, and those 5 years seemed longer than his entire previous life. And he was already 55. He had lived in this house for over half a century. His childhood had passed here. He had brought his young wife here once. His children had grown up here. So why now, looking at the house, did he feel nothing? Absolutely nothing. He expected to feel sad or suddenly uplifted by joyful memories. There were joys he too. He had put up swings for his daughters under the apple tree. They used to swing on them in the summer, and he would listen to their laughter while reading on the porch. And there was no sound more beautiful than that laughter. Yes, perhaps that memory still warmed him to this day. The house had aged, just like Donald himself. It leaned like an old man leaning on a cane. The paint had almost peeled off, leaving only dirty green patches on the walls, and the roof probably needed repair. And the garden, once neat and tidy, now resembled more of a forest glade. And the smell of damp leaves, earth, and moss. It turns out, houses age and die too. This thought suddenly made Donald uncomfortable. In his youth, he was sure that there were things in the world that never changed. This house, family, love. Turns out, he was wrong. Oh, Donald. He turned around and saw Barbara. Now, there was someone who hadn't changed. His cousin's wife seemed to remain the same as she was 30 years ago. Just a few more wrinkles on her face. But her eyes, the same blue as the sky. And her light hair braided into a long braid. "Hello," Donald said as Barbara approached him. He noticed the heavy bag in her hand. "We thought you'd never come," she said. "I need to get the house ready for sale," Donald replied. "We found a buyer. Let me help you," and he took the bag from her hand. Barbara smiled. "Thank you. Still a gentleman. I see. How have you been?" "Doing well," the man replied shortly. "Married again for the second time." Barbara glanced down, embarrassed. "Roger said you got married. To a young girl. It seems, not married yet." The man looked at the house again, with its empty windows facing the street, where once white curtains had hung neatly. Without curtains, the house somehow seemed blinded. "I'm planning to get married though." "What did Roger say to you?" "Roger?" Barbara sighed. "What do you think?" "He's probably fuming." Donald raised an eyebrow. "Am I right?" "Yes, you're right," Barbara said. "He said he didn't want to know you at first. Well, when you left Heather, he was very angry. And when you left, he called you names. But now he seems to have calmed down. So, will you come over? Talk at least. You're still brothers, even if cousins." Donald smiled. He sincerely loved his cousin's wife. She was a good woman, kind, intelligent, and calm. It seemed impossible to argue with her. Yes, Roger was lucky to have her. What had he done to deserve such a wife? Even if Barbara disagreed with something, she would listen first, understand why you fought the way you did. In this, she was somewhat like his Linda. Linda always says, if you disagree with someone, don't argue. Try to understand their perspective. But Linda is educated, a psychologist, a PhD. And Barbara seemed to have come to this on her own, without any universities or smart books. "So, what should I say to him?" "You know he's hot-tempered. He won't listen to me," Donald said. "We'll give it a try." Barbara winked. "Come over to our place. Have some tea at least. Roger won't be back from work for another hour." "Let's go." Donald unexpectedly agreed with himself. "I can always make a run for it if need be." "Is that your car?" Barbara exclaimed, only now noticing the blue car parked near the house. "Yes, mine. Business is doing well, so I bought it. And I'm helping out the girls too." Donald nodded. "Good for you." Barbara smiled approvingly. "All right, let's go. November is chilly this year. You might catch a cold. And I have pie at home. Baked it yesterday. You can tell me about the kids. I'm curious." They walked together, They talked about trivial things. Along the way, they encountered a few neighbors, people Donald had known since childhood. They all looked away, as if he were cursed. It wasn't surprising. It was easy to imagine what they said about him. Barbara, a kind soul. As long as she didn't have any problems because of associating with him, nothing had changed at Barbara and Roger's home. It was still cozy, clean, and warm. And the smell of pie. The woman loved to cook. Perhaps no one cooked as well as she did. Except Linda, as Donald thought, cooked better. The hostess seated the guest at the table, placed a cup of tea and a plate of sliced pie in front of him. Tea with thyme, just how you like it. See, I remember. She smiled. Thank you, Barbara. Donald took a small sip and closed his eyes. It seemed to him that not only his palms, but also his soul warmed up from the tea. How's your Roy doing? Roy is in the city right now, the woman said, twirling the plate for some reason. I'm terribly worried about him. He's still young, and there are all sorts of temptations out there. Donald tried to reassure Barbara. Don't worry so much. He's 19. He's an adult. He'll figure it out. I hope so. He's studying to be an auto mechanic, just as he wanted, she said. Roger wanted him to study drilling, saying that where there's oil, there's money. But Roy didn't want that. You remember, he's been crazy about cars since he was a kid. He filled all his albums with drawings of cars. Oh, we argued with Roger back then. Of course, I sided with my son. But in the end, we persuaded Roger. He didn't talk to Roy for a month, of course, but he thawed out later. And how about you? Me? Donald shrugged. I'm doing fine. Living with Linda now. Her daughter is 7. A lovely girl named Megan. Barbara's eyes lit up. Oh, I love that age. They're so interesting. They start asking all sorts of questions. Will you introduce me to her? Yes, I will. You two will get along. By the way, the man warmly looked at Barbara. She was like a sister to him. But there was a chasm between him and his cousin, Roger. Life sometimes throws such unexpected events. They talked a bit more about Roy, Barbara and Roger's son, about Donald's daughters, Evelyn and Margaret. They avoided talking about Heather, Donald's ex-wife. It wasn't surprising. After all, Barbara had been friends with her once, so perhaps she also secretly judged, though Barbara never admitted to it. Their friendship with Barbara had long been in the past, but still, Donald didn't really know what had happened between them. Roger arrived. Seeing Donald, he was stunned, as if he had seen a ghost. Well, hello, Roger, Donald said quietly. Hello, the homeowner replied. Why did you come? Are you going to sell the house? Yes, I found buyers, Donald said. Roger sat down and cast a slightly disapproving look at Barbara. She pretended not to notice. Roger, do you want me to warm up some soup for you or would you prefer pie? She asked carelessly. I'll have pie, Roger said. Barbara, leave us alone for a moment. What? Some secrets from your wife? Barbara frowned. I just want to talk to my cousin. Alone, Roger said, patting Barbara on the back. Come on, don't be upset. Barbara got up, winked at Donald, and left the kitchen. A heavy, unpleasant silence hung in the air. Roger sat there, his hands clasped in front of him. Donald looked at him and didn't know what to say. Lord, this was his life, his, and only his. What right did Roger have to judge him? Roger was lucky with his wife. He didn't even know how Donald lived with Heather, didn't know what happened between them over the years. He didn't know, yet considered himself a righteous man, condemning a sinner. Well, are you happy now? Roger finally asked. Happy, Donald replied. I'm happy now, and I regret nothing. And you don't regret Heather? Roger looked at Donald with a heavy gaze. About, for example, how many years she spent with you. About tearing apart a family. Don't you regret that? There wasn't much of a family to tear apart. Donald frowned. Roger, Can you explain to me why everything is like this for us? Heather and I, are we the first people to get divorced? Not the first. The man nodded. But you tormented her. Do you think I don't know? Everyone knows. And how you tormented her, the whole town saw. The kids never saw me drunk, Donald said. And I never hit Heather. You know that. So you lived with her, and then went to another town to be with a young girl. Roger shook his head. And now you've come here, like nothing happened. Do you think I'll embrace you, bro? That's not going to happen. You regret Heather, don't you? Donald asked. I do. His brother nodded. You know, life could have been different. But you ended up with her. And you, listen, Roger, you have no right to complain. Donald tapped his fingers on the table. It's unclear what you did to deserve Barbara, right? You're the luckiest one. Roger looked at Donald with hatred. Young sitter girl, with an apartment. And Heather, she doesn't measure up, right? All right, I'm leaving. Donald stood up and straightened his sweater. Sorry I agreed to come over. Barbara invited me. I missed her. And you too, Roger. Roger stayed silent. Donald said goodbye to Barbara. She hugged him and whispered in his ear, just wait. Everything will work out. Donald nodded. Yeah, maybe. The weather turned cold outside. A biting wind blew into Donald's face as he reached his home, the home he once considered his own. He lit the fireplace and laid out the bedding on the couch. The same bedding Linda had given him before he left. He had thought he could manage without it. But Linda was caring, attentive to details and comfort. But Heather, she had always been indifferent to what he slept on, what he ate, whether he was well or not. His brings in money, and that's all that matters. It's only now, after so many years, that he seems to have truly understood what feminine tenderness and care mean. They say it's better late than never, but Donald thought otherwise. Maybe it would have been better to never know, because now he felt like there was too little time left to fully enjoy love, to fully understand what it meant. Sometimes he felt like an old stray dog who had finally found his home. And for what merits did God send him Linda? And why did Roger think he ran off with a younger girl? Linda was only 10 years younger than him. Donald lay down on the couch and closed his eyes. In his mind's eye, he saw Linda's face. Delicate, with sad eyes. It seemed to be painted in watercolors. Yes, Linda needed to be painted only in watercolors. There were no bright colors in her, only light. Some kind of airiness, lightness. And where did she find the strength to carry her burden? They say women are stronger than men. Where a man would break, a woman would only bend briefly before straightening up again, becoming even stronger. Donald had broken, and only Linda could fix him. Without her, he would have died somewhere, and there would have been no one to bury him. He stared at the ceiling. The home, his childhood home. Why did it now seem so foreign? It hadn't always been like this. And against his will, Donald found himself immersed in memories. He lived with his mother, Virginia O'Brien. Virginia gave birth late. She was 35 when she had her son. By local standards, she was almost an old woman. There were rumors that she had enchanted her husband, Willie. He was 10 years younger, very handsome, charming. And suddenly, he got involved with Virginia. Local girls whispered behind her back, saying that others her age were already having their third child and thinking about grandchildren. And look at what she had done, captured a young man. She didn't even consider what people would say. Virginia didn't care. She worked proudly, arm in arm with her Willie, and didn't shy away from anyone. If Willie had parents, they would have advised him otherwise. But Willie was an orphan. Both his mother and father had long departed from this world, and he was raised by his elderly, half-blind grandmother. Willie loved Virginia, considering her the most beautiful and attractive woman in the world. He would travel to the city and bring her gifts from there. And when their son was born, he was almost beside himself with happiness. He would even push the stroller himself, something local men hardly did. as they didn't see it as a man's job to fuss with a baby. But Willie didn't care. Donald learned all this from his aunt, Virginia's sister, Beverly. Beverly was 5 years younger than Virginia. Virginia didn't love her sister much. As Donald grew older, he realized that perhaps his mother simply envied her sister. Beverly was fantastically beautiful, resembling a mermaid. Long, chestnut hair, enormous green eyes. When Donald was 4 years old, Beverly left somewhere, like to the city, to work. She returned a couple of years later with a child, Donald's cousin, Roger. After that, Virginia hardly communicated with her sister, speaking strange things about her, calling her bad words that little Donald didn't even understand. Supposedly, she got pregnant from who knows whom. Willie tried to defend Beverly, and every time it led to terrible scandals. Virginia yelled at her husband, threw everything at him that came to hand. She even attempted to hit him a couple of times right in front of their son. When such things happened, little Donald would run away from home and hide with the neighbors or in the woods. The boy grew up. He grew up with his little cousin, Roger. Donald became friends with him. He would often visit Beverly just to hang out with Roger while the woman took care of household chores. By that time, Beverly had already gotten married. With her beauty, she couldn't remain alone, even as a single mother. Her husband's name was George. He was a wonderful person, working as a farm mechanic. In his spare time, he would read books and paint real pictures with oil, like in a museum. Donald was amazed by this. Just a regular canvas, some tubes of paint with incomprehensible names. But what came out of it? It was as if a piece of forest, sky, and lake came alive on the canvas, as if they were reflected in a mirror. George taught Donald how to draw. However, the boy's drawings didn't turn out as good as his teacher's. The man reassured Donald, saying he needed practice. Virginia didn't approve of Donald's friendship with her sister. "You'll run to her again," she grumbled to her son. "You'd be better off staying home than associating with her. She got pregnant from who knows who. She'll teach you no good." "Virginia, you should keep quiet," her husband Willie replied. "Come on, it's all in the past. How long can you dwell on it?" "As long as I need to. That's how long," Virginia said. Some things shouldn't be forgotten. But Donald still ran to his aunt and cousin, growing closer and closer to Roger and his stepfather, George. Willie, Donald's biological father, began to drink. Now, as an adult, Donald understood that he drank because of the unbearable family atmosphere. His wife was jealous of every girl. She could create a scene if he smiled at a neighbor or was too polite to a shop assistant. Willie was fired from his job. He stopped showing up for his shifts on the farm and made ends meet by fixing fences for neighbors or building barns. But these odd jobs were rare, and he spent almost all the money on alcohol. When Donald turned 8, his father was no more. It was winter. Willie had a fight with his wife and went to the neighboring town. There lived a woman who sold alcohol cheaply, and Willie ran to her a couple of times a week. He knew the way perfectly. But for some reason, he took a different route this time. Perhaps he wanted to cut a couple of kilometers across the field. It was in the field that they found him, frozen, never reaching his destination. So Virginia was left alone, with her son in her arms. It seemed as if the woman didn't mourn her husband. She acted as if she hadn't even noticed he was gone. She didn't shed a tear at the funeral. But her sister, Beverly, cried so much she could barely stand. Donald then first thought that his mom was probably a very angry person, and immediately scolded himself for these thoughts. How could he think such things about his own mother? Donald grew up. He and his cousin Roger, they were inseparable. Many mistook them for biological brothers. They even looked alike. Both dark-haired, slender, with big brown eyes. Together, they went fishing, raided ant hills, and competed in homemade bow shooting. Virginia still didn't approve of this friendship. She believed that Roger must have taken after his mother. "He'll turn out to be a scoundrel. Mark my words." With such a mother, she said. With which one? Donald asked. A lowlife, said Virginia. There are women like that. They don't care who they're with. Normal women choose one man for life, but lowlifes go from one guy to another. Aunt Beverly doesn't do that. Donald was surprised. Your Aunt Beverly has calmed down, his mother said through thin, weathered lips. She's been around, bed hopping. Mark my words, Roger will follow her. Donald didn't care. He didn't understand his mother's words and considered Roger his best friend. And thanks to George, Donald realized he wanted to become an artist. His mother absolutely didn't like this desire. You need to get a proper profession that will feed you, she grumbled. Not these scribbles. Who needs them? Who will buy them from you? Artists earn a lot. They paint portraits on commission. Donald objected. Or they draw for various companies. No, you should learn to be a carpenter, or a joiner, or a mechanic. His mother began to bend her fingers, listing suitable professions in her opinion. Use your head. Think for yourself. Oh, what a family. Beverly is a lowlife, and her George with his landscapes. No one needs them. They'll teach you no good. You don't want to listen to your mother, but you look up to them. Donald graduated from school. He wanted to study art, and even prepared for admission with George, drawing still lifes with a simple pencil and painting studies. But Virginia set a condition. Either he would go to study as a carpenter, or she would disown him. She said he should get a proper education first, one that would provide for him, and then he could do what he wanted. So, Donald enrolled in carpentry school. George urged him to at least try. Donald, you have talent. Don't give it up, he said. I'll study art later, sighed Donald. I have to make my mother happy first, or she'll keep complaining. And I can't bear to listen to her. And Donald went to the city. He terribly missed not his mother, but his brother, his Aunt Beverly, and her husband George. He missed the evenings they spent with George standing on the riverbank with easels. Donald made his own easel under George's guidance. It turned out great, just like from a store. Donald missed them a lot, but gradually got used to it. He enjoyed studying. He had always liked tinkering with things, so practical classes were easier for him than for many others. Teachers praised him for his accuracy and thorough approach to work. He made new friends. He attended college parties. And Donald was popular with the girls. He grew taller, broader in the shoulders, learned to style his hair fashionably, and wore cool jeans. The guys from college teased him. He looked like Elvis Presley. Even his eyes, brown with a squint, were just the same. For a while, Donald enjoyed his popularity. He met girls on the streets, took pretty girls to cafes. He had money. He worked as a loader in the evenings. But none of the girls really captured his heart. Going out, hugging, even kissing a couple of times, sure, that happened. But something serious? No. Donald never met anyone he felt like spending his life with. He believed that when he saw the right one, his heart would skip a beat, and he would immediately know that she was the one he would spend his whole life with. But his heart never skipped a beat, and Donald happily went on dates and dances with beautiful girls. It even led to the bedroom. Donald didn't refuse if the girl hinted that she wouldn't mind continuing the acquaintance in a different setting. But that was it. He just didn't want anything more. And his girls didn't insist either. He himself tried to choose girls who wanted nothing more than pleasant company without obligations. Everyone's happy. No one's hurt. What's wrong with that? Thought the guy. Donald finished his second year of college. During the holidays, he went to visit his mother. He was already 20 years old and felt like a fully grown man. He even grew a mustache to look even older. Seeing him, Virginia clapped her hands. "Look at you, son. You've become a groom already," she exclaimed. "What groom?" laughed Donald. "First, I need to finish my education and go to the army. Then we can talk about getting married. Don't drag it out," Virginia warned, pointing her finger at him. "Son, I want grandchildren. I've already found a girl for you. Donald decided not to pursue the topic of the girl his mother saw as his future wife. Feed your son, mother. He smiled. I'm tired from the road. In the evening, Donald went for a walk around town with his cousin Roger. He shared the latest news. Roger had finished school and planned to apply to become a veterinarian, but was afraid he wouldn't pass the exams. It's tough there. Biology, chemistry. He sighed. Mother says not to be afraid. If I don't get in, I'll work for a year and try again. What about the army? Donald asked. I'm not fit for that. Roger smirked. No girl will look at you if you don't serve. Donald stated firmly. One already did. Roger blushed. What? Come on, spill it. Donald laughed. Have you found a fiancé already? Don't you dare get married before me. Mother won't forgive me if you surpass me. And Aunt Beverly gets grandchildren before her. I'm not planning to get married, Roger said. Nothing like that yet. I just like one girl. Donald understood. It seemed his cousin had fallen in love, deeply and irrevocably, judging by his reluctance to talk about his mysterious girl. Maybe he's afraid that Donald will steal his girlfriend. Roger was handsome, but Donald understood he was more attractive. Roger was shorter, without a mustache. His eyebrows weren't as thick, and his shoulders weren't as broad. Clearly, he was afraid of competition. Well, let him keep his secrets. Shall we go to the dance? Roger asked. There's a dance tonight at the club. Will your girl come? Donald joked. She won't. They won't let her in. Roger's face showed sadness. I just mentioned her casually, and here you are teasing me. Oh, all right, all right. Donald raised his hands in surrender. Keep your secrets if you like it that way. Let's go to the dance. At the club dance, he met Rose. She stood alone in the corner. Donald saw her and couldn't take his eyes off her. He felt like he had never seen anyone more beautiful in his life. And finally, Donald's heart skipped a beat. It even hurt a little. She was wonderful, with her curly hair down to her shoulders and her long, slender neck. For some reason, Donald immediately wanted to touch that neck and run his fingers over it. And her lips, plump and adorned with dark cherry lipstick. Probably kissing such lips was like eating ripe, juicy strawberries. Who's that? Donald quietly asked Roger. That? Roger nodded towards the girl. Rose. She moved here recently. They say her mother kicked her out of the house. Rose. Donald uttered her name as if savoring it. She really does look like a flower. Well, you're really poetic, brother. Want to write her a poem? Roger teased, grabbing Donald's elbow and pulling him closer. She's get pregnant by who knows who. That's why they kicked her out of the house. So she came here, rents a room from Mrs. Todd's, and works at the daycare. Donald took a closer look and understood. Rose was subtly covering her slightly rounded belly. He also noticed that people seemed to avoid her. Other girls were asked to dance, but she stood aside, like a statue. A beautiful marble statue, beautiful and unattainable. Donald said, I'll go introduce myself to her. What are you doing? Your mother will kill you, Roger said. And why is she even here? I don't understand. Oh, come on. Donald looked at his brother. With quick steps, he approached Rose. She looked at Donald with fear and a desperate hope. Somehow, his heart ached from that look, as if her pain suddenly became his too. Donald. He extended his hand to her. And what's your name? As if you don't know. She sighed. Rose. Nice to meet you. Have you just arrived? Yes. I came for the holidays. And I'm living here with my mom. Donald squeezed her cold hand. For some reason, he didn't want to let go of her. But he had to. Otherwise, she might get scared and think Donald was crazy. Then I get it. She blinked for a moment. Nobody wants to dance with me, but I'll dance. Donald smiled. Will you join me? She glanced at everyone present. Many were looking at them with curiosity. No wonder Donald, Virginia's son, was inviting Rose, the rejected and pregnant one, to dance. Aren't you afraid people will gossip? She asked, looking him in the eyes. I'm not afraid of anything. Donald winked. Okay. Rose smiled, looking even more beautiful. If you're not afraid, then I won't refuse. He danced with her all evening. He just couldn't tear himself away from her. Rose moved beautifully, as if she had been dancing all her life. Donald admired her and eagerly inhaled the scent of her perfume. She smelled like roses, freshly bloomed ones. Then Donald walked her home. Will you go to dances with me again? He asked. Donald, I won't. Rose replied seriously. You're a good guy. But you understand. She lowered her gaze to her belly. He stopped and took her elbow. So what? I'll give birth soon. She shrugged. I have to think about the baby. And you'll just play with me and leave. I know guys like you, handsome ones. Am I handsome? He smiled. Do you really think so? Oh, come on. Rose looked at him seriously. I don't need this. I go to dances just to watch people. Don't think I'm looking for a man here, but you found one. Donald squeezed her elbow a little tighter. Listen, I don't mind. There are no strangers, children. Rose looked at him again with fear, but also with hope. You'll disappear later. I don't want to start hoping for someone. I trusted one person already. And what now? I won't disappear, Donald said seriously. I have a year left of studying. Then I'll come back here. And what? Am I supposed to wait for you? She laughed. Just like that, Donald suddenly felt terribly foolish. What was he even saying? He had just seen her for the first time in his life, and he was already practically proposing marriage. Well, let's get to know each other first, the guy suggested. Let's go for a walk tomorrow. I'll come for you around 5 in the evening. Okay, she pondered, and Donald got scared. What if she refused? If you don't like me, I won't bother you anymore, he promised. You have nothing to lose, okay? Rose replied after a short pause. But just a work. And I want to tell you straight away. If you think it's easy with me just because I'm pregnant, then you're mistaken. Fooling around in bed is not my thing. I'm telling you straight up. I never thought that, Donald sincerely said. I swear. The next day they met and went for a walk by the river. There they sat on the bank. Rose looked thoughtfully at the water, and Donald admired her. He had never seen a woman more beautiful. It seemed to him that he could look at Rose endlessly. He would never get tired of it. Do you want to ask something? She turned to him. A lock of hair fell on her forehead. Donald wanted to brush it away, tuck it behind her ear, but he didn't dare. About what? About this. She caressed her belly. Don't say you don't want to know. Well, it's interesting, he admitted, but I don't want to pry. It's not my business. It's a common story. Rose smiled. We had geologists staying in our town once. There's a quarry nearby. They're constantly researching something there. So, one of them liked me, promised to take me to the city, said he loved me. I believed him. And then they left. He left me a phone number. I called him, and they answered, saying it was the laundry number. Well, I cried. Thought I'd forget. And then I started feeling sick in the mornings. Mom immediately knew something was wrong, and we went to the doctor. Rose fell silent. It was clear that it wasn't easy for her to talk about it. Donald didn't rush her. They said I was pregnant. Rose bitterly smiled. Oh, my mom screamed so loud. She said I disgraced her, kicked me out of the house. I packed my things and moved here. Don't know what's next. Still working. And then, I don't even think that far ahead. Well, maybe your mom will forgive you, Donald asked. She won't. Rose shook her head. She told me since I was a child that if I ever got pregnant by accident, she'd kill me. And that's what happened. She didn't kill me, but she kicked me out of the house. The guy couldn't resist and stroked Rose's back. She didn't pull away. He wanted to kiss her, but Donald got scared. Maybe she'd think he saw her as available. He couldn't. Donald knew for sure he'd marry Rose, and no one would stop him. "Do you pity me?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "And I also want to beat up your geologist. I don't mind." She stretched her legs out in front of her and leaned back, exposing her face to the sun's rays. "So, are we going to keep walking, or have you changed your mind?" Donald didn't change his mind. He started seeing Rose every day and decided to propose to her. He just needed to find the right moment and plan everything out. Maybe he'll take her to the city. They'll need to find an apartment for the two of them and the baby. He didn't know how to do it right. So, he decided to seek advice from George. The man listened to Donald and smiled sadly. "You're right. There are no strangers' children. If you love a woman, what's the difference? Have you told your mom?" "No, of course not." Donald waved his hand. "It's my business, not hers." "You're right. But Virginia won't accept Rose. You understand that?" "Yes, I understand," Donald said gloomily. "Well, don't worry," said George. "Beverly and I will help your Rose if needed. Virginia will eventually calm down. She won't accept it, but she'll get tired of causing scandals. And then maybe you'll settle in the city. Don't worry, everything will be fine." First, Donald introduced Rose to Beverly and George. Beverly liked the girl immediately. She served her the best pieces on her plate, poured her tea, and even gave her a sweater she had knitted for herself. Roger, however, seemed dissatisfied with something, as if he was supposed to marry Rose, but he didn't want to. But Donald didn't pay attention to him. Soon, Donald's mother found out that her son was spending evenings with Rose and erupted into the expected scandal. "Have you gone mad?" she yelled throughout the house. "She's a loose woman. Got pregnant who knows from whom, and she'll cheat on you. I want my grandchildren to be my grandchildren, not born from who knows whom." "Mom, I've made up my mind," Donald told her firmly. "I love her, and that's it." "You love her?" His mother laughed. "That love will pass in a month. And if you marry her, Donald, you'll have to bear her child on yourself. And you'll have to pay child support if you get divorced." "I'll figure it out myself," he said. That evening, he left home, went to Rose. Donald and Rose were left alone. That night everything happened. Donald had never felt anything like that with other girls. It was just pleasant for the body, nothing more. But this time, he felt like he was dissolving in her, feeling what she felt. He caught every sound, every sensation. He drank and couldn't get drunk. What difference did it make whose child it was? He would love it, and then they would have their own children, just as curly-haired as their mother. The summer flew by unnoticed. In the fall, Donald had to return to the city to finish college. He invited Rose to go with him, but she refused. "Why? You'll have to worry about finding a place to live. I'll give birth, and then we'll figure something out," she said. "Don't worry, I'll wait for you. I love you," Donald whispered to her. "I love you too." She ran her hand through his hair. "Even if you are foolish." At first, Rose wrote him letters, but then she stopped. Donald worried terribly. Maybe something happened. He asked his mother about Rose, but she ignored his questions. Then he guessed to ask Beverly. "She went somewhere." The woman sighed. "Didn't want to tell you." "What?" Donald shouted into the receiver. "How did she leave? Where?" "Come over, and I'll tell you everything," his aunt replied. "Just don't blame me. I tried my best." Donald dropped out of college and returned to his hometown. He didn't go to his mother. Instead, he went straight to Beverly. She told him that right after Donald left, his mother, Virginia, took matters into her own hands. She spread rumors about Rose to the locals. She said Rose got pregnant from a married man and tried to put a spell on Donald. Virginia definitely knew about it. Otherwise, how could she explain why her son lost his mind as soon as he saw that wench with her belly? According to Virginia, Young guys don't fall in love with girls who are pregnant with other men's babies. It just doesn't happen. Locals started treating Rose worse and worse. They even wrote nasty words on the fence of the house where she lived. Meanwhile, Beverly tried to help Rose move to the neighboring town. She advised, "I'll give you money. I'll help. Wait to Donald. He's a good guy. He loves you." "I don't want to," Rose replied. "There's no place for me here, and I don't want to ruin Donald's life." Beverly hoped that Rose would come to her senses, endure, and wait for Donald. But the girl simply disappeared. She packed her things and left. Donald tried to find her, but no one had seen Rose. The guy thought he would never forgive his mother. She separated him from his beloved. She was solely to blame for what happened. But gradually, the pain began to subside, and his mother was alone. Donald realized that she did it only because she loved him and wanted happiness to him. Of course, the happiness that seemed to her to be the only right one. And Rose didn't fit into those frames. He finished college, then joined the army. His mother often wrote him letters, saying he would come back, and he would have to get married. Why wait? And she found a girl for him. A good girl. Smart, beautiful, with decent parents. By the time he returned, she would be 18, and they could get married. Donald thought about it and decided, why not? He wouldn't be able to love anyone as he loved his Rose anyway. Maybe love wasn't necessary to build a family. What difference did it make which girl to marry? Maybe his mother was right. Her heart told her who would be best for her son. Besides, Donald had read that in India, all marriages are arranged. Parents just find spouses for their children, and the children obediently agree. They can even meet their spouse on the day of the wedding. And there are almost no divorces. They live together until old age, raise children, and then grandchildren. Donald returned to his hometown after 2 years. His mother greeted him with tears and hugs. They didn't talk about Rose. Donald's wound healed. He often thought, if she loved him, she would have stayed, waited, despite everything. Or maybe that geologist, the father of her child, wrote to her after all, and she left for the city, forgetting Donald forever. Sometimes the guy remembered her. He wondered, how was she? How was her baby? Where does Rose live? What does she do? And does she think about him? However, Donald carefully pushed these thoughts away. The past belongs in the past. No other way. On the very first day after his arrival, Donald's mother started talking about the upcoming wedding. With a smile, watching Donald eat, she said, "Well, son, are you ready to meet your bride?" Donald almost choked. "What? Already? I just got here. Let me rest." "Donald, why wait? I don't even know the bride. We need to talk first. At least." He pushed his spoon aside. "Why are you in such a hurry? I just want happiness for you, son." His mother's smile widened. "There won't be happiness without a wife, and there won't be any without children. I'm still strong enough to help with grandchildren, as much as I can. And you'll go to work. It's time for you to settle down. So, tell me about the bride at least." Donald shook his head. "Or is it a pig in a poke? Maybe she's ugly or dumb." And his mom just laughed in response. "What? She's beautiful and smart. Her name is Heather. She lives across the street. Remember her?" "I remember." Donald was surprised. "But she's so young. She's grown up. She just turned 18 recently. It's time to get married, Donald. And her parents are okay with it. They remember you. They say there's no better husband for their daughter." Donald remembered Heather poorly. She was some fur-haired girl. Shy, never looked in the eyes. He never thought about her. She was so little. What kind of wife could she be? And only now Donald realized that Heather was already 18, and she wasn't little anymore. How time flies. It's maddening. The guy decided to give in. And why not? What's wrong with Heather compared to other girls? 2 days later, he went with his mother to the house where Heather lived with her parents. Donald immediately understood. They arranged a viewing. Mother and Heather's mother, Claudia, set the table. The father asked the guy questions about where he wants to work, where he served, how many children he wants. Heather indeed turned into a pretty young girl. She looked at Donald with sad and frightened eyes. And Donald didn't like that look. She should be happy. But she sat as if she was about to cry. Finally, the questioning was over. "Well, Donald, I like you," Heather's father said. "Go for a work for now. Adults need to talk." He and Heather left the house and sat on a bench by the fence. There was a wild rose bush near the bench, and its flowers smelled sweetly of fresh roses. This smell reminded Donald of the evening he met his beloved. His rose. "Oh, what's this?" he murmured. "They want us to get married," Heather said quietly. "Did you understand?" "Yes, my mother keeps talking about it." Donald nodded. "Tell me, do you want to or not? If not, I'll tell my mother." Heather started fiddling with the hem of her dress. "Well, it seems like I want to, but also not really. I don't know myself," she said. "But I want to more than I don't want to." "Then I agree too." And Donald smiled. "I promise to be a good husband to you, and I'll be a good wife," Heather said. "Mom really wants us to get married. She talks about you all day long. Donald, 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 Donald." "Well, let's get married then." Donald plucked a rose from the bush and handed it to Heather. "Here, this is my first gift to you." They didn't delay the wedding. Donald became Heather's husband within a month. They moved into Virginia's house. Donald didn't understand how to feel about his newlywed wife. She seemed nice to him. Beautiful, blue-eyed, fair-haired, slender, pleasant, and fun to be around. Heather was a giggler, laughing at anything. With her, you wouldn't get bored. But there was just no feeling like the one he had with Rose. The feeling of his heart squeezing with love, wanting to hold on to that person forever. To shield them from the world. To envelop them in safety. No, he seemed to love Heather too, but it was different. It was as if he loved Rose in vivid colors, brightly, while his love for Heather was calm, maybe even a bit dull. Donald quickly found a job, working at a furniture factory. He liked the job, although the commute was quite long, almost an hour. The factory was in a neighboring town. But Donald enjoyed the works, even joking that strolls were good for health. Besides, the young man hoped that he would buy a car soon, and then he wouldn't have to spend so much time on the road. After the wedding, things suddenly soured with Roger. His cousin didn't even come to the wedding, claiming he was sick. He started visiting a couple of weeks later, but only when Heather wasn't home. She worked as a telephone operator, sometimes on the night shift. That's when Roger would drop by Donald's place to talk about life, have some tea, or something stronger. One of those evenings, Roger confessed that he was planning to get married. To her. "Your own?" Donald asked. "Well, the one you didn't bother introducing me to." "No, it didn't work out with her," his cousin replied shortly. "I found someone else at work." Donald. Roger worked on a farm, helping with machinery repairs. "A milkmaid?" "Ha." Donald joked. "No, she recently graduated from veterinary college. She's good. Her name's Barbara." "Oh, a veterinarian," Donald exclaimed. "Did you change your mind about going to college, brother?" "Yeah, I'm doing okay without it." Roger shrugged. "We'll visit her on the weekend. I'll introduce you." Donald liked Roger's fiancée. She was cute, a bit shy, and she looked at Roger with such adoring eyes that there was no doubt about her love. Roger, on the other hand, seemed somewhat reserved, as if he was a bit shy around the girl. Donald chalked it up to Roger's shyness. However, for some reason, Heather didn't like Barbara. After Roger left, she said, "She's kind of ugly and fat." Barbara was indeed a bit plump. Not fat, but rather curvy. "Oh, come on. She has a nice figure." Donald shrugged. "There's something to hold on to." "Yeah, and she's pimply too." Heather continued. Did you notice the acne? Donald shrugged. I didn't pay attention. Why would I? Overall, she's a pretty girl. I liked her. I don't know why Roger needs her, Heather said. She'll turn into a pig in a couple of years. And she ran her hands over her slim waist. Donald chuckled. Heather, to me, you're the most beautiful. Donald smiled. I lucked out more than Roger. Just so you know. Then Heather got pregnant. Donald eagerly awaited the arrival of their son or daughter. Virginia was also looking forward to holding her first grandchild. She knitted socks, ironed diapers, and brought a crib and stroller from a neighbor. Heather quit her job. She suffered from severe morning sickness and didn't even have the strength to get out of bed in the morning. And then something terrible happened. Heather went into premature labor. She was rushed to the city in an ambulance, with Donald following closely behind. He didn't even get to hold the baby in his arms. The boy died immediately after birth. Donald supported his wife as best he could. After returning home, he didn't let her do anything, bought her favorite candies, and showered her with gifts. Every day, Donald repeated, "We will have more children, my love. Many more children. As many as we want. And this one will become an angel who will protect us and our family from all troubles." You'll see. Heather gradually recovered. But Virginia didn't forget what happened. For some reason, she convinced herself that the child died because of the mother's fault. Her attitude towards her daughter-in-law changed forever. She probably ate who knows what, ran around who knows where, maybe even drank when no one was looking. Virginia would say, "That's why she lost the baby." "Mom, stop it." Donald would object. "She's not to blame. The doctors said it happens, and no one knows why." "I know. Somehow it didn't happen to me. I carried and gave birth." Virginia shook her head. She should have been monitored. Virginia began to monitor Heather herself. She nearly drove her daughter-in-law to daily hysterics. But even hysterics didn't prevent Heather from getting pregnant again. It happened by accident. Donald planned to wait until Heather fully recovered. But fate decided otherwise, and Virginia calmed down a bit. It seemed like everything was falling into place. At the due date, Heather gave birth to a girl, Evelyn. Donald hoped that his mother would finally get what she wanted and calm down. But that wasn't the case. For some reason, Virginia was terribly disappointed that she now had a granddaughter. In her opinion, a normal woman should first give birth to a son for her husband. "I'm sorry, son," she would say. "You got an inadequate girl." She didn't give birth to a son. She couldn't handle it. Donald couldn't believe his ears. How could a mother say such things? And who cares about the gender of the child anyway? The main thing is that the child is healthy. What nonsense. Moreover, his mother herself arranged for Donald to marry Heather. Virginia sometimes reduced her daughter-in-law to tears. Donald realized that something had to change. Otherwise, his mother would drive Heather crazy with her nagging. She hardly even touched her granddaughter. Sometimes she could help with washing diapers or sit with the stroller in the garden or on the porch. But not more than that. Virginia looked at Evelyn with a strange disgust, and even told Donald that it wasn't too late to divorce and find another wife who would give him a son. It seemed to him that his mother was simply going crazy. He asked Heather not to pay attention to his mother's words, but at the same time understood that this advice was almost impossible to follow. Something had to be done, and moving seemed to Donald the only possible option. However, they didn't have money for a new house yet. Heather wasn't working, and Donald's salary barely covered the current expenses. Barbara came to the rescue. Heather somehow confided in her about her mother-in-law's torment, and Barbara offered her to stay at her place while Donald was at work. "I'll help you with the baby," Barbara suggested. "And if I'm at work, just stay here." Though Heather didn't like Barbara, she agreed. To Donald, the situation seemed abnormal. His wife and daughter hiding from his mother at a friend's house. But there was no other way. They had to accept it. Sometimes Heather stayed at Barbara and Roger's all night, which annoyed Donald. Virginia, however, was calm and even pleased. It's better without her. And anyway, you know, Evelyn doesn't resemble you at all. Maybe your wife cheated on you while you were at work. Virginia said. Mom, Evelyn is my spitting image. Donald replied. Mom, you wanted me to marry Heather. I did what you said. So what do you want now? Why are you doing all this? What's wrong with Heather? Well, I gave you advice. Where were you looking? You could have found someone better. It's all because of you. After you met that Rose, I was afraid you'd find someone like her. So, I hurried. Yes, I hurried. I suggested this Heather to you. Donald didn't argue. He was saving money for a new home and dreamed of getting away from his mother, cursing himself for rushing into marriage. And then Heather got pregnant again. A second girl was born, named Margaret. Virginia seemed to calm down a bit, stopped bothering Heather, and even babysat the granddaughters after work. Donald was almost happy. He adored his daughters. All his free time was devoted to Evelyn and Margaret. He rejoiced in every little success of theirs, their first steps, words, smiles. He even bought a camera to capture every day. He was terribly afraid of missing something. How quickly they were growing up. The love for his daughters revealed an unpleasant truth to Donald. He never managed to love Heather. He helped her as much as he could, never raised his voice to her, bought her everything she asked for. But Donald didn't love her. Sometimes he thought, maybe all the love for the woman who was in his soul was meant for Rose. Rose left, and his love ended. The girls grew up. Heather never returned to work, deciding to be a homemaker. Donald was fine with that. He was paid well. He became the head of the workshop and even bought a car. Donald wanted more children. One, maybe two more. But after Margaret's birth, it became clear that his dreams were not meant to come true. The labor was difficult, prolonged. Heather had to spend almost 2 weeks in the hospital afterward. Donald asked his wife if she wanted more children, and she categorically refused. I'm sure, darling, I just can't go through another childbirth, Heather said. And he agreed with her. He had no right to force Heather to have more children. 2 daughters. That was not bad. It was great. Although it would have been nice to have a son too. Or a 3rd daughter. It seemed like his love could fill a whole crowd of little ones. A couple of times he even talked to his wife about adopting a child. But Heather was categorically against it. She believed she wouldn't love someone else's baby as much as her own. For some reason, as soon as Heather said she didn't want any more children, Donald lost interest in her as a woman. And she wasn't eager to fulfill her duty either. She got tired with the girls to the point where she would fall asleep as soon as her head touched the pillow. The passionate and affectionate nights with her husband were forgotten. One day, the younger one, Margaret, fell seriously ill, catching some infection, covered in a rash, and coughing. Her coughing was heavy, turning blue at the end of each bout. Donald moved to the children's room, monitoring the baby's breathing, taking her temperature. Fortunately, Margaret recovered, and Donald just stayed in the children's room. He simply didn't want to return to the cold, marital bed. It was more comfortable for him to fall asleep in the company of his daughters. He read them fairy tales, staged entire shadow theater performances in the light of the desk lamp. He comforted them when they had bad dreams. Heather didn't say anything when Donald stopped sleeping with her. She took it as something natural. The daughters grew up. Margaret was mischievous, disobedient. She might nod along, pretending to agree with her father, but would do everything her way. She was a true troublemaker, climbing trees, unafraid to swim across the river. But Evelyn, on the contrary, was quiet, thoughtful. She read a lot. At the age of 10, she started writing poems, and her father recorded her creations and marveled how uniquely she saw the world. She compared rain to pearls falling from the clouds to make people's lives happier. Birds were her message from God, and sunbeams were living beings that watched over children when their parents weren't around. Donald was amazed at how different their children were from each other. When Margaret turned 7, she got pneumonia. The medic ordered them to take her to the city. It was winter, and Donald, wrapping Margaret up, set out on the journey. Heather, who was also sick, stayed home with Evelyn. Barbara, who was 3 months pregnant at the time, agreed to go with Donald. The car slowly pushed through the blizzard. Margaret would drift off into an uneasy sleep, then wake up asking for a drink. Barbara held the girl close, almost crying with pity. "Yeah, you know, Barbara, it's like kids are a blessing. But when they're sick, you just want to die." Donald confessed, "Just so you know, once you give birth, you are never calm again." "I'm not calm as it is." Barbara sighed. "What's wrong?" Donald asked. "Something at work." "At work? It's the same old. It's my husband. I've got problems with my husband," Barbara admitted quietly. Donald threw her a quick look in the rearview mirror and asked, "What's going on?" "Nothing." She forced a smile. The smile was fake. "Don't mind me, Donald. Everything's fine. And focus on the road," she said. They arrived at the hospital. Margaret was examined and hospitalized. Her temperature was high. Donald decided to stay in the hospital with his younger daughter. "I'll stay with you," Barbara said. "Okay. I'm sorry I dragged you along," Donald said. And Barbara, "Thank you. I don't even want to be at home lately." Barbara sat down on a bench near the entrance to the emergency department. "I thought getting pregnant would change something. But nothing's changed." "What happened?" Donald sat down beside Barbara and took her hand. "Oh, never mind me with my problems," Barbara said. "Come on, tell me," he said. "We'll pass the time, and maybe I can help in some way." Barbara looked up at him with sad, tired eyes. "Roger has someone," Barbara said barely audibly. "What? How's that possible?" Donald frowned. "He wouldn't cheat on you. He loves you, Barbara. It's impossible not to love you. Women sense these things." "He started disappearing on weekends. Roger hardly looks at me anymore. And just recently, I found a letter in his trouser pocket. Don't think I go through his pockets. I wanted to do laundry, so I checked," Barbara said. "What was in the letter?" Donald looked at Barbara. "Nothing special. Love you. Looking forward to meeting at our spot." And it's not signed. Clever, right? Afraid I'd find it. And he keeps it for some reason. Probably rereads it. Barbara chuckled. "I don't know what to do. Maybe I should leave Roger." "Huh? Do you want that?" the man asked cautiously. "No, of course not. I love him." Barbara looked thoughtfully out the window. "And I love George and Beverly too. You know, I grew up without parents. I'm an orphan. And they became like mother and father to me. If I leave Roger, it's like leaving them too." Donald nodded. Yes. Barbara was raised by her aunt. Her parents either disappeared without a trace or died. Barbara didn't like to talk about their fate, and Donald preferred not to ask unnecessary questions. But he knew that Beverly truly adored her daughter-in-law. Oh, if only his own mother loved Heather like that. Wait, maybe he's not cheating, Donald speculated. Someone might be bothering him. He's a handsome man. You know how girls always admired him. He loves you, Barbara. Want me to talk to him? No, please. What are you thinking? Barbara was scared. I'll handle it myself. I shouldn't have told you. Let's forget about it. Oh, and here comes the doctor. A young doctor approached them. Apparently recently graduated from university. "Hello. The condition is stable," he said. "The child will stay with us for at least a week. It's good you brought her. We'll administer antibiotics. Take tests. You're responsible parents. Some wait until the last minute." "Can I go to her, please?" Donald asked. "And who's going? Dad or Mom?" The doctor smiled. "By the way, Margaret is a brave girl. When we drew blood from her, she didn't even flinch. Said falling from a tree in the summer hurt more." "She's like that," Donald said proudly. "I'll go to her." "Okay, Barbara, Will you wait? Go, go, Donald, I'll be here. The woman nodded. When Donald entered the room, his daughter was already asleep. He stroked her head, kissed her, admired her for a while. He often found himself admiring his daughters like this, just as he used to look at his Rose, without any impure thoughts, without desire, just looking and thinking how nature created something so beautiful. The memory of Rose pricked his heart like a needle. Donald shook his head. What a haunting. When will this end? It's been so many years, and he still can't forget her. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe she really enchanted him. That's why he can't find happiness with Heather. Donald kissed his daughter's cheek once more and left the room. He and Barbara sat in the reception area until morning. In the morning, Donald drove Barbara home, took a week off from work, and told his wife he was going to the city. Heather, I want to be with Margaret. She's scared alone, he said. And the money? Heather asked. They won't pay you for a week off. Heather, what are you saying? Donald was surprised. We can't leave her alone. And you're sick. You can't go anyway. Oh, you spoil her. Unexpectedly sided with Heather. Virginia, Margaret is already so unruly, and she'll get even worse. Donald didn't argue. He was afraid he would lose his temper and yell at his mother and wife. How could they allow their daughter to lie completely alone in a scary hospital room among strangers? There's money. His weekly earnings won't affect anything. Donald went to the kitchen, deciding to gather some food. He didn't even know where he would spend the night. Maybe he could afford a cheap hotel room. Or would they let him sleep in the waiting room? And if he was lucky, he could stay in Margaret's room. Virginia entered the kitchen. The mother sat down at the table and watched her son packing. What, Donald? Are you upset? The woman asked. No, Donald lied. I'm worried about our daughter, and that's Heather's fault. By the way, Virginia said, children run around the yard without scarves, without hats. Then they get sick. What's surprising? Oh, I chose the wrong bride for you, son. I admit it. Made a mistake. When you were in the city, she met everyone. I thought she would marry you and settle down. Mom, listen, I'm not interested in all this. Donald looked the woman in the eyes. When I lived in the city, I also dated girls. But that's all in the past. She's seeing someone now, Donald. You stay late at work. She runs off somewhere. Says she's going to a friend's place. But where does she have friends? I haven't seen a single one. Virginia shrugged thoughtfully. She has a man. Son, think if you need all this. Look at other women. Take Barbara, for example. She is wonderful. And keep a clean house. Mom, Barbara is married. Married to Roger. What are you even talking about? So what if she's married? Virginia challenged. She'll get divorced. What kind of a husband is Roger? Not a husband. A joke. Donald, think about it. Talk to Barbara. Go out with her somewhere. Maybe something will work out. And divorcing that Roger won't be a problem. Mom, honestly, you scare me sometimes, Donald said, looking his mother in the eyes. I'll go. I'll come back with my daughter. Go. Just think about my words. Virginia chuckled. I've lived my life, and I know what I'm talking about. Donald said goodbye to his eldest daughter. Evelyn hugged her dad and promised to listen to Mom and behave well. But Heather dodged his kiss. She was unhappy that Donald was leaving. But he didn't care. He wouldn't leave his daughter behind. Margaret was getting better. She responded well to the antibiotics. Donald bought a puzzle, and they played a bit in the hospital room. The doctor allowed him to stay with his daughter. There were no other children in the room, so Donald could sleep on the spare bed. The bed was too small, and he had to sleep with his legs curled up. In the morning, his back was terribly sore, but he was willing to endure it for his daughter. On the third day, Margaret had stopped coughing. Her temperature had dropped, and the girl sat in bed, enthusiastically drawing something in a sketchbook with colored pencils. What's this? Donald asked. looking at her drawing. "This," Margaret pointed to the picture. "This is me. This is you and my sister Evelyn." "Okay. But where's Mom and Grandma?" Donald stroked her light curly hair. "Did you forget?" The girl laughed. "Oh, Dad, I forgot. I'll draw Mom, but I won't draw Grandma." "Why not?" "She doesn't love us." Margaret sighed. "She always says it would have been better if we were boys because she's ashamed to look people in the eye." "But why is that?" "Sweetheart, don't listen to what Grandma says," her father advised. "She loves you very much. She just, well, she's just like that." "I see," Margaret replied seriously. "Dad, buy me oranges. I really want oranges." "It will be done, my princess." The man dressed and left the hospital. The day was beautiful. The sun was shining, and fine snow was falling. Overnight, the branches of the trees had been covered with fluffy white frost. It would be great to capture all of this on canvas. The branches resembling corals, the shimmering air. And yet, the man had forgotten that Christmas was just a couple of weeks away. And he hadn't even bought gifts for his daughters. He needed to think of something. Evelyn wanted a new doll, and Margaret asked for a book of fairy tales. Donald headed to the nearest store. He needed to buy Margaret some candy. She loved chocolate, especially with nuts. Donald was already at the checkout with oranges, 2 chocolate bars, and a bottle of soda when someone's hand suddenly touched his shoulder. He turned around and couldn't believe his eyes. It was as if the ground had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. He couldn't breathe. She hadn't changed much. The eyes, the lips, the smile. Only her hair was shorter, but still curled into locks. Once upon a time, he loved touching them with his fingers. You take a strand, pull it towards you, and then let go. The strand springs back to its original shape like a spring. "Rose." "Hello, Donald." She smiled. "What are you doing here?" "At first, I didn't recognize you." She was dressed in a fitted red coat with a fur collar. She had such a slender waist. It seemed you could wrap your fingers around it. "It's me," he managed to say. "I see." The woman nodded. "Did you miss me?" Excuse me, young folks. Are you planning to pay?" grumbled the woman standing in line behind Rose. Donald snapped out of it and placed his purchases in front of the cashier, still unable to take his eyes off Rose. Suddenly, she laughed. "Did I scare you?" No, not at all," he said. I didn't expect it." They paid and walked out. Snowflakes fell on Rose's hair. Donald couldn't help but admire them. "How's your life? Maybe you'll work me home. I live nearby," she suggested. The man agreed. He simply couldn't refuse. Not for all the treasures in the world. He couldn't believe his eyes. Rose was by his side again, just as beautiful as when he first met her at the dance. "I'm doing well," Donald said. "Got married when I came back from the army. 2 daughters were born. Now the youngest one is sick, and I'm here with her in the hospital." "I knew you would be a good father," she said thoughtfully. "Rose, why did you run away then? Why didn't you wait?" "Let's not dwell on it. Okay," she pleaded. "Many years have passed. It's not worth it. I'm doing well now. I have a son. He's in school. Dreams of becoming a soldier. I'm against it, of course, but what can you do? He's very determined. He just doesn't want to think about anything else. And I had to give in." "Are you married?" Donald blurted out, and Rose laughed again. "You're so curious. You want to know everything. By the way, we arrived. Here's where I live." Will she invite him or not? Donald's heart slowed down. On one hand, he really didn't want to leave, but on the other hand, he knew what could happen. He was drawn to her too strongly, as if she had been living in his soul all this time and completely possessed it. But he was married. He couldn't entertain such thoughts about another woman. And how many times had he and Heather slept in different bedrooms? It had been several years already. But Donald still couldn't allow himself to cheat. He knew he wouldn't forgive himself for it. Yes, there were women at work who hinted that they wouldn't mind trying. The girl from accounting, for example, constantly invited him over when her husband was away on business. Fix the faucet, Donald. I'm all alone. Donald did fix a faucet and went home, ignoring the open robe that left nothing to the imagination. But he had wanted to back then. He had wanted it badly. He knew that in the case of Rose, he wouldn't be able to hold back. What are you thinking about? She asked. Sorry, I'm not inviting you in. It's a mess in house. He understood everything. There couldn't be any continuation. And it seemed right. But why did he want so much to say that he didn't care about the mess, didn't care about anything? Just invite me in. Here's my number. Rose took out a notepad from her bag and wrote down the digits. Call me. Let's meet up. Chat. There's a lot of catching up to do. She slipped the note into the pocket of his jacket and smiled. Well, Donald, bye for now. It was nice to see you. The man returned to the hospital. Together with his daughter, they ate oranges. Donald looked at his daughter and realized he shouldn't call Rose. Never. It would be best to just throw away her phone number and forget about that meeting. What's done is done. Now he had Heather. He had daughters. But he didn't throw away the phone. That night, the man slept poorly. Thoughts of Rose haunted him. About the days they spent together. Indeed, he was destined for only one great love. And he spent it not on his wife, but on the woman who ran away and didn't wait for him then. 3 days later, Margaret was discharged from the hospital. They returned home. Heather was unhappy with her husband's long absence. Donald. Why? She would have been fine in the hospital alone. Nothing would have happened to her. She grumbled. Because I decided so. Donald raised his voice. Is that argument enough for you? Virginia continued to talk about how Donald should win Barbara from Roger. However, her son didn't listen to his mother. Heather indeed behaved strangely. She ran away somewhere in the evenings, leaving the children with Donald. She started buying new cosmetics, sewed herself several fancy dresses. Donald caught himself thinking that he didn't care. Although she was his wife, she felt like a stranger. Barbara gave birth to a son. They named the baby Roy. Barbara seemed to be over the moon with happiness. She adored her son, never letting him out of her arms, blossoming and becoming even more beautiful. Roger seemed happy about the heir, but his joy was somewhat restrained. Maybe it was meant to be. Donald was just abnormal, loving his daughters so much. One day, Donald put the girls to bed and went to make tea. His mother, Virginia, was in the kitchen. Are they asleep? She asked. Yes, they are. Evelyn complains of a headache. Donald sighed. I don't know. Maybe I should take her to the doctor. A mother should take care of that. The woman said. She's so cunning. She dumps the kids on you, takes your paycheck, and then disappears somewhere. Just ran off again now. Where? The man was surprised. How would I know? By the way, son, take this. Virginia handed Donald a package. There's clothes for the boy. The neighbor gave them. Barbara asked for it. Take it to her. Okay, I'll take it tomorrow. Donald sat down at the table and yawned. I'm tired. I'll have tea and go to bed. Take it. Virginia raised her voice slightly. Barbara's waiting. I promised. Should I go with my sore legs? And Donald sighed. His mother had indeed been getting sick often lately. Doctors diagnosed her with diabetes. He bought her a glucometer and insulin. But would Virginia monitor her blood sugar level? No, of course not. She eats whatever she wants, but then complains about her legs hurting. Her eyesight was deteriorating too. He should take her to the eye doctor. But where to find the strength and time? Okay, Mom, I'll take it. Donald nodded. And are you trying to set me up with her again? Be honest. Me? I never tried, Virginia said. I was just suggesting you use your head. Think a little. Heather turned out to be useless, and she's bad mother, and a lousy hostess. I blame myself. Son, I want to fix everything while I'm still alive. Listen, Mom, of course, thank you for caring. But it's my business. Donald rubbed his tired neck. Understand? I'm content with everything. Oh, you're so stubborn. Virginia pursed her lips. I'll go lie down. But still, take the package today. Roger barely earns anything. Barbara can't afford to buy clothes for the baby. Beverly spoiled him. If you don't know how to raise children, don't have them. Isn't that right? Donald ignored his mother's chatter. Why was she so angry? As if she was offended by the whole world. What was she lacking? Donald finished his tea, took the package, put on his jacket, and went to Barbara and Roger. Halfway there, he noticed a couple standing in the light of a street lamp. The man and the woman were hugging and whispering about something. Donald decided to pretend he didn't notice them. But as he got closer, he recognized Heather's coat. His throat went dry. So, his mother was right. He hadn't seen who Heather was hugging or whispering to. Perhaps a normal man would have approached, grabbed his wife by the shoulder, dragged her away from her lover. Maybe he would have punched the lover in the face. But Donald just quickened his pace. Emptiness, nothing more. Scorched earth. He handed the package to Barbara. She looked tired, but she smiled and enthusiastically talked about how wonderful and amazing Roy was. Do you want some tea? She offered. Sure. Donald smiled. And where's Roger? At work. Something broke there. He's fixing it. She put the kettle on, not letting go of Roy. Beverly and George are already asleep, so I'm handling everything here alone. Are you happy? Donald asked, leaning in and stroking Roy's head. You're glowing, Barbara. You're glowing after giving birth. And how can I not glow? She said. Look at the miracle I have now. I'm sorry about that conversation. Well, at the hospital, I made something up for myself. Hormones, probably. Roger is the best in the world. They chatted for a while. Then Donald went home. Heather came back and immediately went to bed. Donald, as usual, settled on the couch in the children's room. That night, he dreamed of Rose, the evening of their first meeting. In the dream, he, young, danced with her, admiring her eyes, hair, and lips. And Rose looked at Donald with a mysterious smile and stayed silent. For some reason, her silence terrified Donald terribly. He wanted to leave, but he couldn't unclasp his hands and let her go. They spun and spun in a dance that seemed endless. Donald waited for the end of the week. On Friday evening, he told Heather that he was going to the city. She reacted with her usual indifference. Understood. Bring some yarn, please. I want to knit a scarf. I'll tell you later which one. I'll come back on Sunday evening. He warned. Why so long? Heather asked. I want to meet up with a friend. Donald lied. She nodded. Okay. Just don't drink too much. He arrived in the city early Saturday morning. He immediately called Rose. Hi. I want to meet up. Hello, Donald. I knew you'd call. Come to my place. Remember where? Apartment 15, 4th floor. He arrived at her place from the station. Rose opened the door quickly, as if she had been waiting for him. He took a step and hugged her as tightly as he could. She laughed. Donald, you'll crush me. Let's go. I have wine. They drank wine. They talked. Rose told him about her son, and Donald told her about his daughters. He didn't want to talk about Heather, and didn't want to know if Rose had someone. Judging by the apartment, the man didn't live here. There was no razor in the bathroom, no men's jacket on the coat rack in the hallway, no men's shoes, colognes, or deodorants. And for some reason, this instilled in Donald a vague hope. Hope for what? The man himself didn't quite understand. Hope for change, for real love in his life. A love that fills to the brim and inspires greatness. The day ended in bed. Everything happened somehow naturally. He took a shower and came out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his hips. Rose was dressed in a light, soft blue silk robe adorned with images of flying cranes. He approached her and pulled her closer. Rose leaned into him and buried her face against his chest. "I thought I wouldn't see you," she said. "You shouldn't have run away." "Rose," Donald replied. She raised her head, and he kissed her on the lips. In the morning, he woke up, holding her in his arms. Strangely, he didn't feel guilty. Donald thought he simply couldn't live if he cheated on Heather. But now, everything had changed. If she had someone, then he had the right to it all. Besides, it was Rose, his woman. The woman whom Donald seemed to have loved all these years. She opened her eyes and smiled. "If only we could always wake up like this." She caressed his cheek. "Yes, I would like that too." Donald stretched and pecked her on the cheek. "Donald, you've changed," Rose said. "You've got wrinkles. And why so early? But you haven't changed, dear. Just the same as you were." "Not the same," she sighed. 10 years have passed. I'm over 30 now, and soon I'll be of no use to anyone." "Don't talk nonsense. Rose, I will always need you." "Why did you run away then? Answer me. Why didn't you say anything?" She sat up and hugged her knees. Donald admired her slender back. "I couldn't bait. Who could? Everyone looked at me askance. The landlady started telling me to leave, not to disgrace her. Your mother spread rumors. The town is small. There's nowhere to hide. I was alone with a belly. And what was my way out?" "Donald, how awful." He stroked her back with his hand. The woman leaned her head back, enjoying his touch. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, Rose. You could have written, called me. I didn't want to ruin your life." She turned to him and squinted. "They wouldn't have let you marry me anyway. Your mother already found someone for you. A good, clean girl." Rose smirked. "Yeah, she found someone." Donald nodded. "I foolishly listened to my mother instead of looking for you, dear. But things turned out well for me. I spent the first 3 nights at the station. Then a woman noticed me. A good woman. Kind. She worked as a dispatcher at the station." Rose recounted. "Her mother was sick, bedridden. She said she'd give me a job taking care of her mom in exchange for a room and food. I agreed, took care of her, befriended the woman. I had a son, and then I got married." "Married?" Donald exclaimed. "Why are you so surprised? Did you think I would suffer for you for the rest of my life?" Rose's eyes flashed with anger. "I had to settle down. I was alone with a child in my arms. What was I supposed to do? People advised me to put my son in an orphanage, but I refused. And I found a good manual. He accepted someone else's child. And he accepted me." "So, are you married?" Donald asked. "Not anymore," Rose replied shortly. "We got divorced. That's just how it happened. He left me the apartment. I'm grateful to him for that." "So, is the interrogation over? Or do you want to know something else?" I'm sorry. Donald kissed Rose on the crown of her head and breathed in the scent of her hair with pleasure. "It's something." Donald had never liked Heather's scent. Well, the scent itself was pleasant, it seemed, but Donald didn't pay attention to it. He didn't enjoy it. "It's okay, Donald. I understand. You're curious. Let's go make breakfast. Do you want scrambled eggs?" They cooked breakfast together. Then they watched some movie. They even took a bath together. Donald felt like the happiest person alive. He forgot about Heather, about his mother. He didn't even think about the kids. Rose became the center of his world, the meaning of his life, as if she were a lighthouse he had been sailing towards for years. And finally, he could bask in this light after endless wandering in the darkness. By Sunday evening, he had to go home. More than anything else in the world, Donald wanted to stay. To stay with her. "Can I come next weekend?" he asked. "No." Rose looked thoughtfully into his eyes. "I'd like to, but my son will be coming. I don't want you two to meet." "Are you going to hide me?" He frowned. "For now, yes." Rose replied. It's not the right time yet. He's still young. I can't just spring it on him like that. What if you disappear in a month? Have a change of heart, for example. Go back to your wife and kids. Rose, I love you, Donald said. Do you doubt that? Just wait. She smirked. Maybe I want to test you, dear. Fine, he grumbled. But it's nonsense. If you want, I'll get a divorce tomorrow and come to you. Aha. And what about the kids? Child support, work. She started to bend her fingers. And what if you get tired of me soon? No, darling. We need time. And then we'll figure something out. Donald lingered for a long time before leaving. He stood outside Rose's windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of her silhouette. But Rose didn't come to the windows. The man went home. His daughters rushed to him with hugs. He lifted them up and kissed them. Heather also came out to greet her husband. Did you buy what I asked for? No, sorry. I forgot, he admitted. You're always like this. She frowned. Donald almost blurted out, ask your lover. But he restrained himself. Not now. Not in front of the kids. Daddy, I drew you in armor. Like a knight, Margaret said. And I came up with a new story. Evelyn tugged at his ear, trying to get his attention. Daddy, can I read it to you? Okay. Donald spent the rest of the evening with the kids. He watched his daughters, smiled, and wondered what would happen next. He would move in with Rose, get divorced from Heather, let her live however she wanted. But how to take the kids? Of course, the girls would live with him. Rose would surely love them and accept them. And they would have an older brother. There was no other way. He planned to go see Rose the next weekend, but he couldn't. His mother's condition worsened, so he had to take her to the hospital. Donald called Rose and said they wouldn't be able to see each other for a while. I understand, she said dryly. Rose, please understand, my mother isn't well. He tried to explain the situation. I can't leave her. Rose didn't respond to Donald and hung up the phone. Virginia's condition was deteriorating. Her heart and kidneys were failing. Beverly came to the hospital to take care of her. Virginia showed no ounce of gratitude. She looked at her sister with malice, grumbling and scolding Beverly for everything she did wrong. Virginia felt that Beverly was more of a hindrance than help. Beverly, go home, Donald suggested to his aunt. I can handle this myself. I'm used to having a sister like her. She sighed. Why doesn't she love you like that? What did you do to her? Donald asked. This question had interested him for many years. Beverly paused for a moment, then forced a smile. Virginia has always been like this. Always so difficult. She never liked me, that's all. Maybe she was jealous. Who knows? Donald, I've got news to it all. I feel sorry for her. She suffers the most from her own character. 2 weeks later, Virginia passed away. Donald strangely admitted to himself that it somehow felt easier without his mother. No, he loved her. He was a good son. He did everything he could for his mother. But he no longer wanted to listen to her arguments about how he should marry Barbara and leave Heather. Moreover, Donald realized that he still couldn't forgive her for driving Rose away. Yes, his mother wanted to protect him from what she considered an unworthy woman. But in doing so, she had ruined Donald's life. But he still had time to make things right. He was still young and full of energy. He found Rose. Fate had brought them back together, and he believed that everything would be fine now. Donald started to visit Rose in the city frequently. She didn't always let him in. Sometimes her son was coming, or she had plans with friends, or she had work to do at home. Heather seemed oblivious to his absences. This filled Donald with a strange hope. Maybe his wife really didn't care anymore. There were no feelings left. Heather loved someone else, so she would agree to a divorce easily. A whole year passed this way. Donald was simultaneously the happiest and the most unhappy person. He had Rose, but he didn't know what the future held. He had wonderful children, but he felt like he was betraying them when he went to see his beloved woman and enjoyed her company. It was as if he had all the necessary pieces to assemble the word happiness, but he just couldn't put it together. Sometimes one piece went missing, sometimes another, and sometimes it formed a completely different word. Not the one he wanted to see, but nevertheless, Donald was infinitely happy. For example, when he was with Rose, when he admired her, when he gave her gifts, he bought her ring with a small emerald. He'd take extra shifts to save up for it. She wore the ring often, and Donald liked to imagine that it was a symbol that Rose belonged only to him. He was about to talk to Heather about divorce, but her mother fell ill. Oncology, cancer in the female part. Heather was distraught. Donald had to support his wife, accompany her to the hospital with her mother, and stay with the girls when Heather was with her mother. Another year passed. Rose began to speak more frequently about taking action. It's either you with your wife or you with me. I don't like that you're living a double life, Donald. She repeated again and again. It's humiliating for me, darling. I can't just do that. Donald justified himself. Her mother is ill and will soon leave this world. I can't abandon her in such a situation. After all, we're not strangers. We just need to wait a little. Well, let's wait. But don't forget, I can find someone else. Someone who won't have such problems. Rose warned. Donald didn't believe Rose's words. He believed she loved him. And such a feeling couldn't be one-sided. They were made for each other, as cliché as it might sound. But Donald also felt sorry for Heather. She had lost weight. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. Her temples sunken. The girls had also become quieter, sensing their mother's depressed state. Donald did his best. He tried to make Heather happy, found good doctors, and took care of her so that his wife could rest more. Donald's mother-in-law passed away after an endless year and a half. On the day of the funeral, Donald slept with Heather for the first time in a long while. She trembled with tears. He hugged her, her thin, unhappy form pressed against him. Heather, hold on. Heather, you have to hold on, he whispered. She turned to him and embraced him around the neck. Donald felt her breath on his cheek, felt the protruding vertebrae on her back. It seemed that during her mother's illness, Heather had shrunk by half. Her clothes hung loose on her. A surge of pity overwhelmed him. He kissed Heather on the forehead, then on the lips, and then it all just happened on its own. She seemed to throw herself at him, desperate for him, as if he were her only salvation from pain. And Donald couldn't resist. They woke up together in the morning. I love you, Heather said to him. I love you too, he replied. Lord, why is life so complicated? After Heather's mother passed away, she changed, becoming more affectionate, trying to please her husband, cooking his favorite dishes. In the evenings, he now found a set table waiting for him. Heather looked at Donald with a tender smile, asking how his day went. And Donald couldn't let go of Rose. He still visited her at least a couple of times a month. And she became more and more irritated. What? Did you turn me into a mistress and you're satisfied? Rose would ask. When will you finally decide? When I'm old. I'm turning 35 soon. I need to build my life, and I'm waiting for you. I'll tell her. Rose, the man promised. This week I'll tell her. We'll talk it out, make a decision, and I'll come to you forever. But every time, Donald couldn't find the strength to have the conversation. When he saw Heather's face, when she hugged him, when he kissed his daughters on their foreheads, in those moments, his resolve seemed to leave him, and Donald began to wonder, is it worth breaking up the family? Maybe he should part with Rose. Yes, that would be the right thing to do, and he decided that he would meet her one last time, to remember forever and say goodbye. But when he arrived at her place, he realized he loved this woman, and he didn't have the strength to let her go. He didn't know what to do, and he had no one to talk to about what was happening. One day, Donald felt so bad that he drank after work. He just bought a bottle of vodka and drank it all in one go near the store, just to stop thinking for a while, to stop tormenting himself and searching for an answer to a question that seemed to not exist at all. It was an August evening. Donald quickly got drunk, sat right in the grass on the roadside, and buried his head in his knees. Above all, he wanted to die right then and there, to disappear, to dissolve into the air. That's when Barbara found him. "Donald." She shook him by the shoulder. "Donald, how are you?" He raised a heavy gaze to Barbara. "Me? Fine," said Donald. "What's up? You're terribly drunk," Barbara exclaimed. "Come on, get up. Let's go home. I'll work you." "I'm not going. The girls will see." He got up, leaning on her shoulder. "I don't want to. My father used to drink. I was scared of him when he was drunk." "Oh, come on," Barbara sighed. "Come to my place. Roger is on the night shift. I'll tell Heather I asked you to help. I don't know, fix the faucet." She dragged him to her house and laid him on the couch, brought him strong tea with sugar, covered him with a blanket. "Donald, you never drank before," Barbara sighed, sitting down next to him. "What happened?" "Nothing," the man said. Thinking about taking even a sip of tea made his head spin, and nausea rose in his throat. "I'm fine." "Yeah, I can see how fine you are." Barbara stroked his head. "Donald, they say it's easier if you share. I'm not insisting, but if you want, I listen." He wiped his forehead with his hand. "Barbara, I have another woman. I don't know what to do. I'm cheating on my wife, Heather." And he told her everything. His tongue stumbled, his lips didn't obey, but he spoke and spoke. Barbara was the first to hear his story. She listened without interrupting Donald. There was no trace of judgment in her eyes, only sympathy, which Donald least expected. "It's tough for you, Donald," Barbara said softly when he finished speaking. "You know what I'm most afraid of? For example, that husband will cheat." The man asked. "No." She shook her head, then looked thoughtfully past Donald. "I'm most afraid that I'll ruin my son's life, decide that it's best for him and insist on it. And then it turns out it wasn't the right thing to do, that I should have let him make decisions and mistakes on his own." "What are you getting at?" Donald began to sober up. His head was pounding harder, but his mind was gradually clearing. "Just that. Don't dwell on it. Just thinking out loud." Barbara's lips touched a light smile. "It's a tough situation, but only you can make the decision." "Heather will hate me," he muttered. "See, you've already made up your mind." Barbara sighed. "Lie down a bit more and then go home. I won't tell anyone anything, I promise. But you need to act already. You can't live like this, divided between two homes. Well, maybe someone can, but not you. You're too conscientious. You'll eat yourself up. There won't be anything left, not even a piece." She escorted him home. The man lay next to the already sleeping Heather and firmly decided, tomorrow he would tell her everything. And whatever happens, happens. In the morning, Heather was in a great mood. Donald found her in the kitchen. She was making pancakes and humming a tune to herself. "Good morning." She smiled at him and waved a wooden spatula. "How did you sleep, dear?" "Fine." He sat down at the table and rubbed his forehead. His head still hurt. Yes, he shouldn't have drunk yesterday. He always had a bad reaction to alcohol. "Heather, there's something I want to tell you." "Me too." She transferred the pancakes onto a plate and placed it in front of Donald. "Let's not wake the girls. Let's sit together." "Yeah, let's," he said. "Heather, I've wanted to say." He faltered. Her eyes sparkled, as if he had promised to give her something she had long dreamed of. Donald felt like a monster. "Heather, we need to break up," Donald said. Her face elongated, becoming ugly and somehow old. Donald noticed that a few long dark hairs were growing on his wife's chin. "What?" she whispered. "Donald, are you kidding me right now?" "No, Heather. I have someone else. He clasped his hands so tightly that his fingers hurt. I love her. I promise I won't abandon the girls or you. I'll help as much as I can. Send money. Come to visit you. You're not leaving. You're not leaving. Heather screamed. SHH. You'll wake the girls. Donald tried to touch her, but she recoiled. Don't you dare touch me, Heather. He shook his head helplessly. I can't go on like this. She burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Heather, you'll find a good man who will love you. Donald tried to comfort her. She managed to calm down, wiped her eyes, red and swollen. Then she looked at him with a long gaze. You're not leaving, Heather. It's better this way for everyone, he said. Trust me, it's hard now, but you'll understand later. You're not leaving. She smirked. I know you're not leaving. I'm pregnant. What? He couldn't believe his ears. How? She shrugged. Don't you know how these things happen? I went to the doctor after work yesterday, and he confirmed it. Why are you looking at me like that? Don't you believe me? Go ask yourself. Oh my God. Donald whispered. Heather. The situation became more complicated for the man. He couldn't leave his pregnant wife, but he couldn't give up Rose either. The decision was made. The child was his. He would support him. But living with Heather, Donald couldn't bait anymore. That same evening, he went to Rose's place with his belongings. He told her everything. So, you did sleep with her after all? She asked. And lead to me, it just happened. She lost her mother. I felt sorry for her, Donald confessed. How compassionate of you. I guess. She looked at him with disdain. Okay, Donald. File for divorce. I've been waiting for my happiness. For some reason, everything wasn't as Donald had hoped. He thought Rose would be happy, hug him, maybe offer to open champagne, finally introduce him to her son. But she seemed dissatisfied. Maybe he should have acted sooner. The next month was a nightmare. Heather refused to divorce Donald. She cried, screamed, threatened that he would never see the children. Roger stopped talking to his cousin. Even Beverly turned away from her nephew. Donald knew she's against divorces. Rose changed too. She was distant, refused intimacy with him. 2 days before the divorce, Donald went to Rose. He bought his beloved a bouquet of her favorite lilies. She opened the door and smiled. Oh, Donald's here. Kevin. I told you about him. Donald hoped that Rose's son would come out into the hallway. But he saw a tall man with a bald head, dressed in a stretched-out t-shirt with a football club emblem. Nice to meet you. The man approached Donald and shook his hand. I'm Kevin. Very nice to meet you, Donald muttered. This is my old friend, Rose said. Donald and I have known each other for a long time. He came to town yesterday, decided to stop by. Donald, this is Kevin, my husband. What? Donald almost dropped the bouquet. Husband? Yes, I told you. She took the lilies from his hands and handed them to Kevin. Here, put them in the vase, please. Kevin jealously looked at Donald and went to the kitchen. Who is this? Donald asked. He's my husband. She smiled. You're not going to make a scene, are you? Will you have tea with us? He just got back from his shift today. Just don't linger too much. He's jealous. Rose. Why? He looked at her. And to Donald. It seemed like he saw a stranger in front of him. Why are you doing this, Donald? Did you think I forgave you? She said. You left. Abandoned me. Didn't look back, but promised. Get out of here, and I never want to see you again. Donald looked at Rose one last time and walked away. For almost a day, he wandered around the city, not knowing where to go, home, or buy a ticket and go to another city. To the first one he could find, somewhere where nobody knew him. Or maybe just work to the nearest forest, buying a sturdy rope and soap beforehand. After thinking, he returned to Heather. He had nowhere else to go. There won't be a divorce, He said, "If you'll have me, that is." She silently let him into the house. A month later, Heather had a miscarriage. She said it was due to stress. Donald couldn't handle it. He started drinking, feeling like he was repeating his father's fate. When he was drunk, he never caused a scene, just quietly fell asleep, burying his face in the pillow. Only Barbara continued to communicate with him. She begged him to stop drinking, to see a doctor, to start life anew. Barbara repeated to Donald that she felt guilty. "I shouldn't have said what I did," she sighed. "I was stupid. Just stupid. Forgive me." "You're not to blame, Barbara," he replied. "I'm a grown man. I should have fought for myself." For the sake of the children, he continued to live with Heather. Donald loved the girls, and they loved their daddy. Margaret couldn't sleep until he read her a bedtime story, and Evelyn demanded he teach her how to fish. Donald was only happy when he was with the children. Heather hardly spoke to him, answered all questions briefly, and sometimes cried. Donald's heart broke at her tears. He didn't know what to do. He gave her gifts, bought her the fur coat she dreamed of. He even brought a huge TV from the city. But Heather never forgave him. They lived together not as spouses, but as neighbors. Donald decided he would wait until the girls grew up, and then he would leave. He would leave for nowhere. Leave everything to Heather and the girls. And then, well, whatever happens, happens. How foolish and absurd it all turned out to be. Gradually, he drank more and more. The girls grew up and began to be ashamed of their father, whom the neighbors often saw drunk on the street. And Heather turned them against him. Donald often heard what she said to the girls. "This is what happens when you marry an alcoholic. Look at your father, girls. Remember, so you don't repeat my mistakes." Then Donald was fired from his job. He started being late, or even skipping shifts altogether. At first, he was demoted. Then he was called to HR. They asked him to resign, and Donald didn't argue. He wrote a resignation letter and went home. He didn't even say goodbye to his colleagues. It was shameful to look them in the eye. That day, Heather staged a real terrible scene for her husband. "Now you won't even bring in money. At least you used to be somewhat useful. But now, where will you go?" she yelled. "Anywhere," he said quietly. "I won't bother you anymore. I'll go to the city. Maybe I'll find something." "What will you find?" Heather waved her hand. "Who will hire an alcoholic like you? Now I'll have to drag the kids alone. I should have done things the way I wanted, not how my mom wanted." He didn't ask what Heather wanted once. After all, you can't bring back the past, and you can't correct mistakes, Donald thought. He packed his things and went to the city on the same day. His army friend lived there, promising to shelter Donald for a couple of weeks. He couldn't stay in his hometown, couldn't bear the sideways glances and the gossip behind his back. And the most terrifying thing for him was that his daughters were ashamed of him. They didn't need such a father. They deserved better. Donald quickly found a job, landing a position as a master carpenter in a workshop, and firmly resolved not to drink. It was indeed easier to abstain from alcohol in the city. Perhaps it was the change of scenery, or the absence of daily reproaches from his wife. He needed to move away from his friend, find his own place. Money was tight for Donald. He planned to send most of his salary to his wife. He intended to keep just enough for rent and modest meals for himself. The girls would finish school soon. Evelyn, for instance, wanted to attend medical college, which would require funds. So, Donald knew he would have to live frugally. But what did it matter? The main thing was to keep the hunger pangs at bay and have enough energy to go to work. Donald began searching for housing. He dismissed most options either because they were too expensive or too far from work. Donald planned to walk to the factory to save on transportation costs. He often found himself feeling nothing. Emotions only seemed to surface when he drank a little with his friend. The world seemed brighter then, but only briefly. Then came the dullness and a strange enveloping emptiness. And he was okay with that. It was better to feel nothing than to endlessly blame himself for past mistakes. There was only one feeling: longing for his daughters. Donald wanted to call, hear their voices, even if just for a little while. But he didn't call them. What's the point? His daughters probably were glad he was out of their lives now. Margaret often complained that Daddy smelled bad now and stopped hugging him. And before, when she was little, she used to climb onto Donald's lap, rub against his stubble like a kitten, and say that Daddy was like a hedgehog, just as prickly. No, no, no. He couldn't think about that now. That could drive him insane. Finally, he found a suitable option. A couple of blocks from the factory where Donald worked. The price was minimal. However, the ad stated that he would have to live with the landlady. Donald was sure the landlady would be an ancient old lady, and her apartment would undoubtedly be filled with all sorts of junk. But Donald was mistaken. When he came to see the apartment, a woman in her 40s opened the door, dressed in a faded blue tracksuit from many washes. "Are you here about the room?" she asked. "Yes," nodded Donald. "From the ad." "All right. Come in," said the woman, ushering him into the narrow hallway. "I live alone. My husband is away on a business trip." Donald smirked. "Got it. Implies you are not living alone. And no husband. What kind of man would tolerate crooked shelves and exposed wiring? And the need to rent out a room suggests the woman is facing financial difficulties." "The room is small," the landlady continued, "but it has everything. A sofa bed, a table, a wardrobe. You can use the kitchen. I'll allocate a shelf for you in the fridge. There's a bathroom." Donald took off his shoes and placed them neatly in the corner. "Let's have a look then." The room was tiny. The sofa bed and wardrobe barely fit. But Donald didn't need much space. The main thing was to have somewhere to sleep. "Cheap," he commented. "Why's that? Do you have rats or something?" Only now did he really look at the landlady. It was hard to call her beautiful. Her hair was tied up in a bun, her skin dull, her eyes small and gray. Yes, she clearly didn't have a husband. Otherwise she'd take better care of herself. "No, I just live with my child." Not everyone is okay with that. "With a child?" "A child doesn't scare me." Donald smiled. "By the way, what's your name?" "I never asked." "Linda." She shook his hand. "Nice to meet you. And I live with my daughter. She has special needs." "Is she disabled?" Donald asked. Linda furrowed her thin eyebrows. "No, she has special needs. She can be noisy, moves around in a wheelchair. There are no mental disorders. If you're wondering, I'm sorry. Of course, it doesn't matter to me." Donald felt ashamed in front of this petite woman. "I have 2 daughters myself. I'm used to noise." "Our noise is specific." The woman shrugged. "She can wake up at night. Sometimes she bumps into things. Also, I work from home. So if you want to bring someone over, I won't." Donald grimaced. What did she think of him anyway? Who would he bring over? Women? Drinking buddies? Although, Donald didn't look very good. Unshaven, unkempt hair. A sweater he bought, it seems, 15 years ago. Apparently, this woman really needed the money if she was willing to rent a room to him. "All right, you can move in. The deposit is 1 month's rent." Linda smiled. "Is that okay with you?" "Yes, that's fine," nodded Donald. "I'll come by tomorrow. Expect me." The next day, Donald moved his things into Linda's apartment and met her daughter, Megan. She really did move around in a wheelchair, so skillfully that Donald was surprised. She could take care of herself, wash up, brush her teeth, make tea, and even prepare sandwiches and eggs. Linda widened the doorways in the apartment so the wheelchair could pass through easily. But still, Megan sometimes picked up speed and bumped into things. Donald liked the girl. She reminded him of his own daughters, whom he missed terribly. Although, Megan kept her distance a bit. Maybe she wasn't used to him yet. She answered his questions briefly and didn't initiate conversation. Linda worked as a hotline psychologist. Every day, including weekends, she would lock herself in her room for a few hours and take calls from clients. Donald found it surprising how many people couldn't solve their own problems. They called in asking for advice. Turns out, he wasn't the only one like this. Weak, unable to handle his own life. For the first time since moving, he drank after calling Evelyn to wish his eldest daughter a happy birthday. "Evelyn, congratulations, you're all grown up." 16 years old. 17, his daughter corrected dryly. "Did you forget how old I am?" "I remember." "Sorry." Donald was embarrassed. "What do you want? You left, and now you're calling to congratulate me. Do you want me to come over?" He asked. "I'll buy you anything you want." "I don't want anything from you," Evelyn said. Donald heard Heather's voice nearby. "Is that Dad on the phone?" "Give it to me." "Donald, what do you want?" "Don't bother us. The kids don't want to talk to you. You left, so leave for good." His ex-wife sharply said, "You transferred the money." "Thank you." And she hung up. That's when he went to the store and bought a bottle of vodka. Then another. When he went for the third, he fell right in the hallway. That's where Linda found him. "What's this?" she exclaimed, gesturing with her hands. "Nothing." He awkwardly got up and leaned against the wall to steady himself. "I'm fine. I asked you not to drink. There's a child here." Linda told him. "I'll kick you out tomorrow." "No need." He hiccuped and chuckled foolishly. "Oops. Good Lord. What's wrong? Aren't there any decent men left?" Linda shook her head. "Come on. I'll make you some coffee." But Donald couldn't drink the coffee. He fell asleep in the kitchen. The next morning, he woke up covered with a blanket. There was a bottle of mineral water on the table. In the evening, Linda knocked on his door. "Can we talk?" "About what?" sighed the manual. Linda came in and sat on the sofa bed. "Donald, this won't work. If you drink, I don't need this. Find another room." "I'm sorry. I rarely drink, and there was a reason." He defended himself. "What were you celebrating?" She squinted. "Bastille Day. The first man moon landing." "Ha." He paused for a moment, then confessed honestly. "I called my daughter. I wanted to wish her a happy birthday. But she doesn't want to listen to me." "Linda, I don't know what to do." "Donald, tell me what happened." She gently asked. "If you want, we can figure something out." "I don't want to." He smirked. "You'll despise me. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Too many. Now they can't be fixed. I just have to live out my life, earn money for my kids, so that somehow I won't insist." Linda looked at him sympathetically. "I just think you're not a bad person. I don't believe there are bad people. There are those who, like you, make mistakes. But these mistakes can always be realized, and you can try to fix them as best you can. This can't be fixed." Donald rested his chin on his hand. "Oh, and yes, I should have shaved a long time ago. I'm sorry for my appearance, for everything. Should I leave?" She smiled. "But remember, if I ever see you like this again, you won't see me like this again." The man promised. She wanted to leave, but he started talking. He told Linda everything. About Rose. About how he was married to Heather. About meeting Rose again for the second time and her husband. About how he started drinking, lost his job, respect, family. Linda listened, nodding occasionally, sometimes asking guiding questions. The man himself didn't realize how he told her everything. Donald was surprised at himself. He had known her for a very short time, yet he wasn't afraid to talk about himself. The most unpleasant, painful things. "So what?" he asked, finishing his story. "Do you think anything can be fixed?" "Yes, Donald. I think it can." Linda nodded. "The main thing is to start acting. And for starters, you need to stop drinking." "I don't drink much." He frowned. Yes, that's what all alcoholics say. I don't drink much, like everyone else. I have a reason. And so on. You yourself said you drink almost every day. And if you don't drink, you think about how to drink. I see how many beer bottles you throw out and how many there are. You can deceive me, but you won't deceive yourself. Hell, Linda, how do I fix everything? Do you think I like all this? You see, because of vodka, it's like I don't feel anything. At least for a while. It's like anesthesia. I know a good specialist. Donald. Linda reached out and patted him on the shoulder. He runs a group for people like you. Go after work. It doesn't commit you to anything. You don't have to say anything. Look at others. Listen to what they have to say. I won't go. The man said. I don't need your psychology. Well, you don't have to go. I'm not forcing you. She shrugged. But I'll still write down the address for you. You work at the third factory, right? It's close by. Donald decided to go to the meeting of anonymous alcoholics only 2 weeks later. He hadn't planned to. His legs took him to the address that Linda had written on a piece of paper. He had planned to meet a friend for a drink and a chat about life. But for some reason, he changed his mind. After all, what was he losing? He would just look at people, listen, convince himself it wasn't for him. From that day on, he started going twice a week. And he was surprised to find that he wanted to drink less and less. Donald learned to praise himself for every day without drinking. And he often repeated to himself the phrase, there are no former alcoholics. There are those who have given up alcohol. And the man decided that he would never drink again. And somehow, it became easier to breathe. Strength came from somewhere. And even the management began to praise him. They began to hint at promotion. At Linda's home, Donald fixed all the sockets, then corrected the wiring. He straightened the crooked shelf in the hallway. Now they were having breakfast together. Linda, Megan, and Donald. He enjoyed breakfasts prepared by Linda's hands. The man himself didn't understand why. After all, when a woman cooks for you, it's pleasant. Once, he and Linda were watching some movie. Megan had already gone to bed. They sat next to each other on the couch, and Donald caught himself staring at Linda's face. She wasn't that bad after all. Or was it because his body had been cleansed of alcohol and he started looking at women with special interest? Linda, let me distract you. Why are you alone? He blurted out. It just happened. She shrugged. I had a husband, but he just left. He doesn't even pay alimony. Disappeared. Donald felt ashamed. After all, he also left his family and cheated on his wife. Yet Linda didn't judge him. It was as if she had read Donald's thoughts. Everyone has their own situation, Donald. I have no right to judge you. You have to sort things out with your wife and your relationship on your own. After all, I have a different story. Linda got married right after college. She met a cute guy at the movies. He offered to escort her. A banal story, thousands like it. A romance began. The guy's name was Paul. He reminded Linda of a lion. He had thick red hair and freckles on his nose. Linda fell in love with those freckles. They lived together for several years. Linda really wanted children. Paul wasn't in a hurry to become a father. He believed that first, they needed to live a little for themselves. But time passed. Linda was afraid that they would delay the decision too much, and she wouldn't have time to become a mother. And finally, she became pregnant. Paul didn't rejoice in the impending addition, but he didn't particularly object either, considering it one of Linda's whims. His job was to comply and fulfill her desire. Megan was born. Linda was happy. The woman loved her daughter insanely. Paul joked a couple of times that it would have been better if they had a son, an heir, the firstborn. But he was also fine with a daughter. However, those words slightly upset Linda at the time. But she quickly forgot them and immersed herself in motherhood. There was one problem in her life: her mother-in-law. She didn't like Linda and saw no need to hide her feelings. But still, she helped with her granddaughter. She even took her in while Linda and Paul were at work. When Megan turned 3, something terrible happened. The grandmother left her alone and went to take a bath. She lived on the 2nd floor. There were mosquito nets on the windows. Megan climbed onto the windowsill. Later, she confessed to her mom that she saw a beautiful bird on the branch and decided to take a closer look. The girl pushed on the net and fell out. She fell down. Linda nearly killed her mother-in-law. She begged her many times not to leave Megan unattended and to close the windows. But the woman only repeated that Linda was to blame for giving birth and leaving her granddaughter with the grandmother. Unexpectedly, Paul sided with his mother in that situation. Linda never left her daughter's side. Fortunately, it soon became clear that her life was not in danger, but she would probably never walk. Paul decided that he didn't need a disabled child. His mother convinced him that he was still too young to ruin his life. With Linda, he lived for another 2 years. During this time, she tried to convince him that their daughter needed treatment, but Paul believed it wouldn't bring results and preferred to invest the money elsewhere, like in his business. They parted ways. The man quickly found a second wife and moved with her to another city. He never helped his daughters, nor did he show any interest in their well-being. Linda was left alone. It wasn't easy for her, but she managed. She even saved up for a cheap apartment. She had to work both day and night. During the day, she answered calls, and at night, she wrote essays and dissertations for psychology students. Now I'm saving money. I need a lot. She sighed. For what? Donald asked. Well, I showed Megan to a professor last year. He said surgery is possible. Technologies are advancing. If the operation is successful, Megan will start walking, maybe with crutches, but she won't be confined to a wheelchair. Tears glistened in Linda's eyes. But we need a lot of money. A lot. I'm even thinking of selling the apartment, buy something smaller, and succumbing to an unconscious impulse. Donald hugged Linda. She didn't push him away. She rested her head on his shoulder and fell silent. They sat like that until the clock struck midnight. Good night, he whispered quietly to Linda. Good night, she whispered back to Donald. Since that evening, their relationship warmed up, and the man realized he was falling in love with Linda. It was strange. His heart didn't race like it did with Rose, but a calm warmth filled his soul, growing stronger with each passing day. He didn't know what to do for Linda, but he desperately wanted to help her, to make her life easier. And a couple of months later, he confessed his love to her. I'm not asking anything from you, he said. I just want you to know I love you too. She replied. Her eyes sparkled, and Donald realized she was the most beautiful woman he had ever met. A year passed. Donald divorced Heather, proposed to Linda, and she accepted. But they decided not to rush with the wedding. Who needs a wedding? They were already happy together. Donald now gradually set aside money for Megan's operation, but most of the money went to his ex-wife. His daughters grew up. He knew Evelyn got married and had her first child, while the youngest, Margaret, got into veterinary school. He hardly communicated with his ex-wife, Heather. He tried many times to talk, to mend their relationship, but Donald never succeeded. She didn't even want to hear him. But now, in his hometown, he had a house, and this house could be sold, and the money saved and later directed towards Megan's treatment. Of course, he planned to give a portion of the money to his ex-wife, Heather. Donald was tormented by the thought that he had never seen his grandson. Perhaps, by doing so, he could melt her heart. He understood that. Heather tells their daughters nasty things about him. Maybe, if she changes her mind, then the girls will agree to meet him, and here he was in his hometown. It seemed like the circle was closing. It's just a pity that Roger never understood him. What does Linda say? Before judging someone, you have to work in their shoes. Roger doesn't understand what Donald has been through and never will. It seems he's lost his brother, even if he's just a cousin. Forever. The man spent 3 days preparing the house for sale, throwing away all the junk, and tidying up. It was bitter to throw away the old swing. Now they lay under the apple tree, rotten and unwanted. Yet once he used to swing his daughters on them and enjoy their joyful laughter. Old books he read to them aloud. A doll with one eye missing that he found in the attic. Margaret never parted with that doll in her childhood. The man returned to town, completed the deal to sell the house. The money earned was little, but what could he do? No one would offer more for such a house now. It seemed to him that this chapter of his life had finally ended. How much time was left ahead? Maybe very little, or maybe a lot. Who knows what fate has in store? As he was returning home after the deal, Linda asked him to stop by the store. Stepping out of the store, Donald saw a familiar silhouette. It was his ex-wife, Heather. She was walking along the sidewalk, pushing a stroller. Donald quickened his pace. Heather. She turned around. The woman's face contorted with hatred. Heather. Wait. He caught up with her and walked alongside her. Heather. Please, talk to me. You found a younger woman. Leave us alone. See, I'm out with my grandson. Donald looked into the stroller and smiled. A boy, and it's none of your business. The woman quickened her pace. He noticed that her hair had turned gray, and wrinkles had appeared on her face. Well, time spares no one. Heather. Let me talk to the girls, said Donald. I can't go on like this. Can't you see? Can't you? Heather stopped. The child in the stroller woke up and started whimpering. Donald. But could I, according to you? You left, found a new woman, and live your life. And me? I'm left alone. I did everything I could. I sent money. Heather. It's not too late to fix something. It's too late. Donald, please, don't pretend you're a saint, said the man. Do you think I don't know you hugged someone else? I pretended not to see it to keep the family together. I forgave you. But you can't forgive me, can you? What should I do now? Drop dead right here. Yes, drop dead, she said. The child cried louder. Drop dead, Donald. Maybe I'll come to your grave. She probably decided to escape from him and dashed straight onto the road, pushing the stroller ahead. She was almost running. Heather didn't see the approaching car. Donald himself didn't understand what was happening. His body acted faster than his mind. He jumped onto the road, pushing Heather forward. She flew to the opposite side of the sidewalk, miraculously avoiding tipping over the stroller. The impact hit Donald's body. A thought flashed through his mind. I promised to die, and I fulfilled that promise. At least in something. I didn't deceive Heather. Then came a wave of excruciating, unbearable pain. Then darkness. He came to several days later. That's what the doctors told him later. It felt like just a couple of moments had passed. The first thing he saw was Linda's tear-stained face. Oh my God, she exclaimed. Donald. Hey, Linda, the man croaked. Am I alive? Yes, you're alive. She wiped away a tear. Alive and going to live for a long, long time. Donald's ex-wife Heather came to see him a week later, when they transferred him from the ICU to a regular ward. He lay there with both legs broken. Heather sat by his bedside, tense, with tightly pressed lips. The man silently looked at her, while she stared off into the distance. Thank you, she said softly. You saved me and Donald. Donald. The man clarified. Yes, Evelyn named her son after you. I tried to dissuade her, but she still named him Donald. Donald weakly smiled. So, his daughter still loves him after all. She remembers. Donald. The grandson. He wanted to hold him, tickle his soft baby belly. Later. Everything later. I'm sorry, Heather sighed. I was so angry with you. So very angry. And you risked your life to save me and your grandson. Almost died yourself. The doctor said your liver ruptured, and you got a concussion and broken ribs. Tears streamed down the woman's cheeks, and she continued. I met Linda. She's a good woman, Donald. You're lucky to have her. And you're right. I brought it all on myself. With 2 brothers. What? The man was surprised. Yes, I was seeing Roger. When you were in the army, I loved him so much. We were planning to get married. He said he would come to ask for my parents' blessing. I waited and waited. But Virginia wouldn't allow it. She couldn't let Roger be happy. As soon as she found out we were together, she did everything to ensure you'd marry me. Why did she hate him? Whose son is he? Hers real sister's. And your father. Donald couldn't believe his ears. So, what does this mean? He asked. Yeah, Virginia's friend told me about it 3 years ago. Your father, Willie, cheated on Virginia with her own sister. Not surprising. She was beautiful. I've seen the photos. No one could resist. So, he succumbed. Don't know if it was willingly or by force. But then Beverly got pregnant and went to the city, thinking she'd settle there. But she couldn't. So she came back. George knew everything too. But he didn't care. He loved Roger like his own. So, your mom took revenge on her sister and your half-brother. I think you should know. Heather explained. It can't be. Donald whispered. It can. Donald. That's why she drove your father to the grave. She'd quarrel with him, and he'd drink. She never forgave him for cheating. So, would you have married your Rose if not for your mom, Virginia? She convinced herself that if Roger liked me, then you should marry me. You, not him. And I loved him. Loved him for a long time. We used to meet sometimes. But don't think I cheated on you. We only kissed. Nothing more. Maybe it was a mistake. The man replied quietly. If only I had known. Yeah. Time can't be turned back. I pity your mom too. She was deeply hurt. So she ruined everyone's lives. Mine. Yours. Roger's. Her own sister's. And led her husband to the grave. Do you think we can correct these mistakes? Heather. We still have time. Donald weakly smiled. We'll fix everything. And thank you for the daughters. And thank you, Donald, for saving my life and your grandson's. And for the happiness we once had. Right, we did, Heather. And we'll have it again. A few days later, the guy who was driving the car that hit Donald came to the hospital. He asked not to involve the police. Donald understood the guy wasn't at fault. Heather had rushed onto the road herself. He promised not to file a report. Then take this. The guy took out a bundle of money from his bag. No, thanks. You don't need to. Donald shook his head. What for? I know better than anyone you are not guilty. Understand? I feel guilty myself. The guy said. I haven't been able to sleep since it happened. Please, accept it as compensation. When he left, Donald counted the money. Exactly $5,000. That's how much was left for Megan's surgery. It seemed Donald was paying for the little girl's ability to work in this way. And he was fine with that price. 2 years later, they all celebrated little Donald's birthday together. Donald held his grandson in his arms. Linda sat nearby. Heather laid out a magnificent table. Elder daughter Evelyn and her husband, as well as younger Margaret, also came. Margaret told her father about her successes in college. Can I go with you to practice? Megan asked. I also want to be a vet. Sure, let's go. Margaret nodded. But the work is tough. You'll have to carry hay and clean the stables. I'll manage. Megan smiled. Right, Dad. I can run now. After all, of course you'll manage. Donald nodded. There was a ring at the door. The man looked surprised at Heather. Are we expecting someone else? He asked. Yes, Heather said. Go open it. Donald handed the grandson to Evelyn and went to the hallway. Roger was standing behind the door. Well, hello, brother, Roger said, looking Donald straight in the eyes. Turns out we're not half siblings. Full siblings, Donald replied. They hugged. And Donald thought that there were no mistakes that couldn't be corrected. The main thing was to take the first step. The road will lead